As dusk was settling on the streets of Dublin and the nightlife was preparing for its Friday night chaos, a man called Gerald Montaigne headed out of the airport, having flown from the States. He was here for business. He had heard of Dublin through a colleague of his and decided to check out the place. He arrived at his hotel room, placed his luggage down and started to change into something slick. He was in his late 40s and started to dress like he was totally out of a different time period. As he walked through the streets, he got shouted out by some of the drunk locals calling out "pufter" and "sleaze." He just ignored them, but he was a sleazeball. He was a low-level businessman who dealt with X-rated content. During the previous decade he was heavily involved in pornographic films that were filmed on video and released on video. The grand cinematic golden era was gone and films of that substance who churned out on the cheap. One video camera, a pair of unknowns, and filmed in a hotel room or someone's dining room. That's the way the industry was going, and the video sales seemed to say that. He went into a pub, looked at the taps on the bar and ordered a Guinness. Once he took a sip of it, he spat it out. He thought it tasted awful, like he was drinking liquefied smoke, and ordered the barman to get him something more palatable. While he sipped his drink and leaned on the bar, his eye caught a curly red-headed girl who was hanging out with a friend of hers. He kept looking at her and then her eyes turned to him. She smiled at him and he did the same. 20 minutes later he needed some air and popped outside. He lit himself a cigar and stood around looking around at the street. Then the girl came out. She reached for her handbag and started to make a rollie. Once she finished making it, she was fussing that she couldn't find her lighter. He then came over and offered her his light. She thanked him. He started a conversation saying he's from the States and is on a business trip. She then introduces herself as Jane Sutcliffe and she was an apprentice at a hair salon. Gerald then said he makes movies and discreetly said to her that he's looking for actors to be in his next film. Jane took an interest in this. She always thought being an actress and being seen on television by hundreds of people. Gerald then knew she had ambitions and suggested to her that they should meet up to discuss her future stardom. Jane's friend came out and said she's tired. Jane bids farewell to Gerald with a handshake and he said that they'll organize a meeting to discuss further plans. Jane gave a small pouty smirk and walked off with her friend. Gerald looked on at her and decided to head back to his hotel room. He found another rising star, but secretly it's for his own pleasure. A few days later Jane headed to a nearby restaurant to meet with Montaigne. While having dinner, Montaigne proposed his plans for her acting career and then uttered the word pornographic. Jane was a bit taken aback by this. Exposing herself while being filmed on camera and having intercourse with some random man. Montaigne promised her that condoms will be used, flesh-colored painted ones, and slyly pleaded to her to take his offer. Jane sat back in her chair. She kept eye contact on him and gradually agreed to it. Montaigne whooped in delight, making a scene of himself at the restaurant, and the other customers looked at him baffled. He said to Jane that he'll give her details on when shooting begins and where it was going to be filmed. He bided farewell to Jane and parted company. Jane looked on as he walked off down the street. Was it the decision she really wanted to take? The next day Jane headed to a semi-detached house where Montaigne was preparing to film his pornographic video and knocked on the door. A man called Fergus opened and let her in. Montaigne was sitting on a settee in the sitting room and welcomed her. She looked around. A video camcorder was on a tripod and Montaigne gave some direction how she'll in the scene of the video called Sister Breakout. He also introduced her to her co-star Ronan, who was going to perform intercourse with her. Ronan was a professional actor and knew when to pull out. Montaigne reassured her that she'll be fine and once this filming is over she'll be wealthy. Montaigne prepared his two leads to be ready to film. He then blurted out action and Fergus began to start the video camera. During the pile driver position Jane started to see flashes of something in her mind. It scared her and made her scream. Ronan whispery told her to calm down, but she quickly pushed him off and fled the sitting room. Montaigne was baffled by this interruption and shouted at Fergus to turn off the camera. Ronan quickly followed her to the bathroom. He looked her as she cowered on the floor and reassured her that he didn't mean to hurt her. She quickly overcome her emotions and then suddenly came onto him. She grabbed him tightly and said stuff like that experience energized her. Like some ex-boyfriends, all they did was smooth or peck, but Ronan, he did something more animalistic and she liked it. She kept squeezing him tightly, even digging her fingernails into his skin. Ronan felt very concerned for her but also himself and began to plead her to stop. She began to get aggressive with him, shouting out rants and spewing out words describing her fanny. On her back, suckers were starting to slowly emerge out of her skin, and then she bit her bottom lip in a devilish manner. Montaigne knocked on the bathroom door and asked if everything's alright. Then he heard Ronan scream and then the door opened. He peered in. Suddenly Jane's fingers suddenly appeared and gouged his eyes. Montaigne screamed beyond agony and got pulled into the bathroom. A while later Jane emerged from the semi-detached house. She was covered in blood and also she was naked. Her expression looked deadpan. No emotion nor like she cared, and continued walking off. Elsewhere in Dublin were the doctor and Louisa. He had taken the TARDIS to the city to see the Guinness storehouse. It was going through its redesign since it was become a visitor's attraction and decided to check out. He hadn't had a pint of Guinness for a long time and decided to have a taster session to suit his fancy. When they arrived it was still in its redesigned construction, and then the doctor's brain clicked. It's 1997. Visitors won't be let into the storehouse until the year 2000 and decided think of something else while they are here. They entered a pub. Louisa sat down at a table and the doctor ordered 2 pints of Guinness. When he came to the table and presented one of the pints to her, Louisa looked at it. She questioned him if it's a type of beer, some sort of ale. He said it's a stout and it's the archetypical drink that anyone associates the Irish with. She took a sip of it and quickly spat it out. Some of the head dribbled off her lips and said to him that it's vile. He said for her taster buds will take a while to get used to the taste. She wasn't really having it. She thought of the time when they went to the Planet Barcelona and those cocktails. They were something else than fruity. She got up and headed to the bar to get her own drink. Jane walked into the pub having found clothes and removed the blood of her. She leaned against next to Louisa. Louisa turned to Jane and looked at her. Quite a pretty face with curly hair and red-headed. They began to chat. Jane quickly cottoned on that Louisa was American but seemed nice than her Montaigne and insisted that she'll pay for her drink. Louisa thanked her and asked her if she wanted to join her and the doctor. She agreed. At the table Louisa introduced Jane to him. He kindly introduces himself. But Jane just stared at him quite tensely and more flashes in her mind appeared. The doctor thought she was shy and continued drinking his pint. Jane suddenly leaped from her chair and headed to the toilets. Louisa followed in afterwards. Jane was staring at a mucky mirror looking at her reflection and was breathing heavily. Louisa came near to her. She said to her, Jane, if it was something to with the alcohol or is it the presence of the doctor? Then Jane sprang out of her insecurity. She then slowly touched Louisa's hand and started make dirty small talk. Louisa didn't know what to do. Was Jane a lesbian and this was her coming out moment? Jane sorta thrown her against one of the toilet stalls and made her move on to Louisa. Snogging, and then Louisa somehow felt rejuvenated by this. She pushed Jane against the sink and began to grope her. Jane looked at her and grinned. She suggested that they should go somewhere private. Louisa cheekily accepted this. Both them hands and fled the toilets. The doctor meanwhile was on his 12th or 13th pint of Guinness. Louisa quickly came to him, patted his shoulders and said she's off for a bit. He didn't mind as long she comes back, and she giggled. Of course she will, and she and Jane raced out of the pub. The doctor was about to continue with his pint until his attention turned to the mounted television showing a news report regarding a massacre in a semi-detached house and then showed an image of Jane. The doctor stood up from his chair, accidentally knocking over a couple pint glasses, and looked at the screen. That woman has gone with Louisa and quickly headed out of the pub. No sign of the two, and he thinks she'll be in danger if he doesn't act fast. Jane took Louisa to a bed sit and welcomed her in. The place looked small. It smelt of sandalwood and everything had a lace-like quality to it. Louisa asked Jane what she does. Jane replied with that she's works in hairdressing and is only an apprentice. Louisa chimes in that she worked briefly as a model, did a toothpaste commercial and starred in she stuttered a little, a pornographic film. Jane's locked onto her. She says to her that she just starred in one herself today and had a terrible experience from it. Louisa said to her that filming stuff like that is daunting, but it felt like a relief when the experience takes you over. After all, she recently did a second one, but only by accident or just bad timing. Jane came to her and started to stroke her blonde hair. Louisa said if you want to take it to the bedroom, and Jane just smiled. The two landed on bed and make out. Clothes start slowly coming off until they were fanny naked. Jane said she needed to go the bathroom and Louisa didn't mind. She'll wait till she got back. The doctor meanwhile was searching for the two. He looked around. While checked the back alleys, he unexpected walked in on a drunk couple performing anal and quickly shifted away. He then headed towards a line of people who were outside a nightclub. He headed to the front of the queue. He asked the bouncer if the two girls he's searching for were in there. The bouncer didn't care until the doctor showed his leather passport to him and his reaction quickly changed. He let the doctor in. The doctor looked around the place, randomly pulling women to him only to get the wrong ones and then accidentally becomes entwined with a bloke's stag do. The lads were built like rugby players, heavily drunk, and then hoisted him up to the dance floor. The doctor squirmed his way out, but the lads were quite strong and continued taking him into the middle of the club. Louisa was looking through one of Jane's drawers and found an eye mask. She cheekily put it on and laid back with her legs spread ready for Jane. She then felt something go between her legs. She took the eye mask off and saw in horror Jane with an erect penis. She quickly pushed Jane aside. She was freaked out by this and said to her if she was a shapeshifter of sorts. Jane pleaded with her that it's nothing like. She did look down at the penis and said it could have belonged to either Ronan, Montaigne, or Fergus. Louisa wasn't having any of this and quickly left Jane's bed sit. The doctor came out of the nightclub a bit disorientated from the blaring music from the likes of Underworld and The Prodigy. He stumbled his way amongst the streets until he and Louisa accidentally smacked into each other. They got up and she said that Jane is some shapeshifter. The doctor questioned her what kind? What kind? She didn't know herself, only that she obtained a penis from one of 3 guys she must have killed. He thought to himself, a body part absorber of sorts or something quite sick, like stealing body parts to make themselves blend in a male concentrated area. Jane then came out of the darkness and apologized to Louisa. Louisa was still in a bit shock. She wanted to know who she really is, and now Jane couldn't say. She wanted her secret to be hidden and kept left alone. The doctor then approached her. He wanted to know about the murdered men. What were they? Ronan, Montaigne, and Fergus. Jane snarly said they were scuzzy old men trying to make a profit by videoing her having sex, and it triggered her truth self. That's why she killed him. The doctor wanted to know what she is. An axon? A Zulfathuran? Then Jane started to get more flashes in her mind. From the doctor and Louisa's perspective, it was like she was having a severe migraine. Then she quickly fled away from the two. The doctor told her stop, but didn't listen and began to chase her. The doctor and Louisa chased Jane to the river. Jane climbed onto the bridge. The doctor stopped in his tracks and tried to persuade her not to jump. Killing herself won't be the answer for escaping what she is. Jane turned to him and said she's hitching her ride. The doctor paused. What, a hidden spaceship in the river? Then a loud roar emerged from the water and a gigantic creature popped out. Jane prepared to jump and fell onto it. The doctor looked the creature. He defiantly knew what it was. A Skerazon, and what Jane's shapeshifting abilities are. She was a Zygon. The doctor climbed onto the bridge and ordered Louisa up. She says if they are going to jump onto it. He said yes and held her hand. She wasn't sure about this, but before she could change her mind, the doctor jumped off, dragging her down. She screamed and both of them landed on the back of the Skerazon. It made a squeaky squeal noise and then Louisa climbed up. It wasn't a soft landing by any means. The doctor said that a Skerazon's exterior is fused with an extremely tough alloy and that you could get crushed with just one of its feet. The doctor then noticed some of the exterior flapping in the air and then found out it was a hatch. He was puzzled by this and decided to open it. He then asked Louisa to come into the belly of the beast, and he and Louisa crawled in. Inside the Skerazon there was numerous parts of Zygon technology attached around its inners. The doctor wondered if the Zygons had adapted the Skerazons into underwater ships, ripped the whole carcasses out and implemented their own ship's technology into it. He'd seen something like this only a few times on a few planets, recycling their planet's inhabitants for travel and accommodation. Louisa felt a bit freaked by it, and a thought of a killer whale turned into a small hotel was pictured in her mind. The two kept walking through until they saw Jane crouched and was suckling on a small tendril in the corner. She saw them approaching her and quickly stood up. There was green goo dripping down from her mouth. The doctor knew what she's sucking. Milk. Zygon milk. Louisa felt a bit queasy and he told her that the Skerazon supplies milk for the Zygons, a source of food on their home planet. He then turned to Jane and wanted to know answers. Jane backed off and told him that she will kill him. The doctor didn't care and kept getting closer to her. She kept telling him not get nearer until he snapped and she finally revealed her backstory. It was either 75 or 76 when her mother Aileen was raped in a nearby tomato field one night by a dying monster, and 9 months later she died during labor. Jane was sent to a mother-baby home run by nuns. That upbringing was abominable. When she was 6, she witnessed a couple of them bury a newborn baby wrapped in white sheets near a flower bed. Once she started discovering her powers when she was 13, she took revenge of them by killing them and partially masquerading in their forms. The doctor twigged on this event. He saw to the council had covered it up and kept hidden for decades until the once orphans no grown people start taking actions. He then returned to the subject of the Zygon impregnating her mother. Then another thought came to his head. Surely not. A dying survivor from the events of Loch Ness and Westminster. The doctor turned away from her and Louisa looked at him. The last one got away. Somehow ended up in Ireland and then turned back to Jane. Birthed a hybrid. A Zygon-human hybrid. A being that's abilities are topsy-turvy. Like an aggressive form, puberty, and the two genes are fighting each other inside, trying to find a solution to be the dominant form. Jane then mentioned to him that in her visions she sees a bohemian. Teeth, curls, hat and scarf. The doctor quickly leaned in front of her. She's got flashes of one of Zygon's memories he encountered in his 4th incarnation and said to her that he's the same man. Jane looked at him questionably. He's not same man, and the doctor replied that he isn't human at all. He looks like one but he ain't one. Jane still didn't follow. He then said he can help her, and Jane's reply was how? The doctor proposed that he can try and wipe her mind, removing all ties to her half-Zygon heritage. It was sounded risky and could be risky, especially when the doctor has psychic abilities that even him can be fatal. But he wanted to proceed with it. Jane was hesitant at first but decided in the end to go with it. Louisa leaned over him and said if it was wise of him to do it. The doctor wanted to help, and for Jane's own personal history it kinda seemed logical. The doctor put his hands on both sides of Jane's cranium and told her to close her eyes. Louisa watched on as the doctor proceeded to wipe the baggage out of Jane's mind. He sounded in pain and tried to hold in. Flashes of his encounter with the Zygons appeared, flipping rapidly in the perspective of the one who impregnated Jane's mother. A few minutes later he pulled himself back, trying to catch his breath, and turned to Louisa. He'd done it. Wasn't easy, but at least Jane can live on, and Louisa looked over. Jane was in a knocked out state. The doctor said she'll wake up maybe an hour or two. Later on, Jane woke up on a bench near the river. Her head was buzzing, but she then noticed that the visions were gone. She then glanced at the doctor and Louisa, who were leaning against the wall looking out at the river. She came to them to say thanks. The doctor said to her that he managed to wipe the visions away but also improved her shape-shifting abilities. She can seemingly blend well when it suits her, and Jane then felt like she had a new lease of life. She said to him that she'll live and breathe in society. Then she turned into a new form. She said it was based on a picture she seen the hair salon that always stuck with her, and that she'll go by the name Aileen, after her mother. Louisa asked her what is she going to do now. Aileen wasn't sure, but something will come along the way, and bided farewell to the two. The doctor and Louisa looked on at her as she walked away. He then asked Louisa what should they do next. Louisa then quickly changed the subject. What, the Skerazon? The doctor said he programmed it onto autopilot and that it'd be swimming around the world unnoticed. He suggested that they should go and return to the pubs around the city. She gave a little cringe. The thought of a Guinness again made her tingle inside and said she'll stick of something a bit fruitier. The two walked off to the city center, a newspaper blown behind them. On the front page was about a glass house in Cheltenham and an image of a mysterious person called Dr. Simon Maguire. The article mentions that he mysteriously disappeared after one of his patients died in front of the complex.